All right, there's still some folks that haven't showed up yet, but I know that we've got a visitor in town today that may be impacting on traffic, so let's get started. I'd like to welcome all of you for being here today, both members and not yet members. Hopefully we can convert you. So before we start, this presentation this afternoon is going to take about an hour and 45 minutes. There'll be some time at the end for some Q&A. If you do have questions during the prezo, feel free to ask. Chris may take those in line. He may push them off until a little bit later. I'd like to ask everybody here in Brookfield as well as remotely, put your phones on stun or off or whatever the case is, just so they don't interrupt the presentation. For local attendees, Wi-Fi is available. The rest facilities are out on the left-hand side. There are signs out there as well. And you are allowed with food and beverage in here. So if you haven't beveraged up and taken some of the things out from the break room over here on the side, I invite you to do so. A couple of real quick announcements. If you've not yet seen in email as well as on the website, there's a February President's newsletter that's got some items of interest in there. Membership renewal is coming up at the end of April. You will have to reapply if you haven't renewed by that particular point in time. There are also some information there about international volunteer opportunities. There's a deadline on that of February 29th. There's also an exam prep review course survey that we'd like to have you participate in as well. And then elections, it's election season here too, not just nationally. Election for Board of Directors for ISACA KM are coming up as well. Speaking of upcoming events, business model information security is the next subject that's going to be on March 14th. Please note that that is 3 CPE as opposed to normally 2 CPE, and that is going to start an hour early, so it'll be a 1:30 start instead of a 2:30 start. On April 11th, we'll be talking about my favorite subject, hacking. Ethical hacking, though. Ethical hacking, security processes and procedures. And then on May 16th will be our second annual GRC symposium. That's going to go from 8 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon. That is 8 CPEs. And we'll have 2 very special guests, Ken Vanderwall, who is ISACA International President, and then Bob Stroud, who I think is probably a name that's familiar to most of you here in the room as well. So, who cares about business continuity management? I didn't write that, by the way. But I think we all do. So when you take a look at what the intention behind business continuity management, if you want to call it BC, DR, or any one of a number of different acronyms, it's keeping the organization going. So I'm involved in security, compliance, and continuity. And the way that I explain that to executives is you want to keep good information in, bad guys out. You want to stay on the right side of the law. And you want to make sure if your organization trips that it doesn't fall, and if it does fall, you want it to be able to get back up as quickly as possible. So when you take a look at continuity, I think that kind of encompasses it. So just by a quick show of hands here in Brookfield, I apologize to Madison and Appleton. How many people here DR? Show of hands. Couple. Business continuity? Okay. How many BR or DR and BC? Okay. Fewer number of hands. I think Chris is going to do a really nice job today of being able to glue that all together. Chris LaVesser is the IT Service Continuity Manager for GE Healthcare. GE is, I think what's really special about this, and it showed up in the attendance, we had over 100 folks register for today's event. So I think that's a kind of a good proxy. GE is one of the largest companies in the world, one of the most sophisticated companies in the world. And in Chris, in his background and responsibility, is extremely well suited to speak about the topic this afternoon. Chris's background includes, he is a member of your United States Navy. He's also been a consultant for the Department of Defense Healthcare IT strategy and EMR deployment. He spent time with Pro Healthcare and Aurora Healthcare as well. In his current role, he's got responsibility for strategy, awareness, and assurance, and in assisting owners of the business and business units of ensuring continuity. He leads the DR Council, has responsibility for architecture, strategic platforms, solutions, and automation. So I think that today, if you think about it, it's going to be a really thick stew, and this is going to be a meaty stew. There's a lot in this presentation. I had the chance to see it beforehand, and I'll tell you, you're not going to walk away hungry. So with that, please welcome Chris LaVesser.
Am I on? Am I on? No. No? No? That sounds a little better, right? Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Lynn said there'd be some excitement around today's topic. We're coming off of Valentine's Day, which can be tricky and emotionally charged, if I'm not mistaken. So hopefully no one had to enact their personal disaster recovery or relationship continuity plan yesterday. But bringing this into the realm of what we do for a living, we do have quite a meaty presentation today that's going to dive into disaster recovery, dive into business continuity. It's going to mix that stew up a little bit. We'll touch on a lot of theory. We'll delve into some practice. You're going to hear that there's no perfect way to do this, that even GE Healthcare in its heft is not doing this perfectly. We're discovering things every day and refining our processes, trying to improve the maturity of what we're doing. So hopefully we'll have a good discussion. I encourage you to ask questions as we go along. If I think we're going to cover it, maybe I'll just keep breezing along, but otherwise I'd like to stop and talk about the things that are keeping you up at night. So, see if I have my buttons down correctly here. So a couple some of these we can probably skip, okay. Okay, so a little bit about GE, hopefully you've heard of us. 4 major businesses operating in 160 countries for a little over 1.25 centuries now. Over 300,000 employees worldwide, 150 billion in revenue. Divided into energy infrastructure, technology infrastructure, GE Capital, so people can pay for the things that they're buying from us, and then home and business solutions, which is probably where most of us are exposed to GE in our homes. But within technology infrastructure, there's aviation, healthcare, and transportation. Things like jet engines, locomotives, a lot of the imaging equipment that's used in hospitals today. But we also dive into the software space to help control the medical records of the future, things like that. And it's in this space that I work, in healthcare specifically, focusing on IT service continuity. And you already heard a little bit about me, so I won't delve into it too much. But I've been in healthcare for the majority of my career. It's a subject that I'm passionate about, and I've always been a bit of a geek, so that's kind of where I applied myself, the geeky side of healthcare. And I've been around to see a few tragedies, so something like business continuity and disaster recovery has been a good fit for me. So today's agenda, business continuity and disaster recovery. So what? Who cares? Why should we talk about it? We'll go into some business continuity methodology. We'll look at what we're doing at GE Healthcare today, what we're doing well, what we don't think we're doing so well, how to look for and then employ within your organization an assurance and audit framework. We'll go into a little bit of the technology side, and then we'll talk about justifying and selling this to your executives, your leadership, how to bring this home. So to start out with, why are we talking about this again? Who cares? We're all familiar with the big bad storms. We've had a lot of high-profile events lately. The wind, the fire, the earthquakes, the tsunamis, big power outages in Japan. But there are also things that kind of sneak up on us that we're not necessarily thinking about, focusing on, or planning for. You see Gaddafi here, so we're reminded of a lot of the uprisings lately. One thing that caught GE by surprise was when Mubarak decided to turn off the internet in Egypt. We plan for things to break. We'll fix them. We plan for tragedies like that, but when someone just turns the internet off and we're relying on it, wow, we hadn't thought of that. And we kind of had to jump through some flaming hoops to make things happen. Something like the London Olympics, you wouldn't think of this as causing disasters, but GE Healthcare has quite an operational footprint in and around London. For the 22 days that the games are going on, we're expecting 500,000 to 1 million additional people in and around the city of London each day. So the subways will be full, the highways are going to be packed, everyone's going to have their cell phone and their iPad with them. So we're thinking not only are people going to struggle to get to work, but they're not going to be able to work remotely, perhaps, if we don't have infrastructure capacity. So we're looking at things like this, like, wow, something like the games, even though it's not going to break anything, could really cause some capacity problems for us. So there are always reasons to think about disaster recovery and business continuity. In addition, we're moving more data than ever before. We're relying on data more than ever before. The data we have more sensitive than ever before, arguably. More technology-supported workflows, a lot of regulations around the things that we're doing, process regulations as well as data and technology regulations, and interconnectedness on a level we've never seen before. The way we're sharing data up and down supply chains, between competitors, suppliers, customers, it's incredible. And there's always a corporate reputation and image, but more than ever, it's at least balancing to an extent on the technology we're using and relying upon. There's also this emerging competitive space for things like disaster recovery or business continuity in the cloud. A lot of people are selling this as a service now. You need to protect your business, we'll help you do that in the cloud. Amazon, Cerner, Oracle, SunGard, and many others. But there's this reality check. We know we should be doing it, and there are more reasons than ever before to do it, but I'm assuming at least a few people aren't sleeping well at night because this is the disaster recovery or business continuity posture you have. It's scary, but it's true. And I've been around to see some instances like this, people sweating in hallways and having some pretty heated discussions. It can get ugly. And we looked at some of the triggers, disaster triggers, but probability of those things and the consequence of those things are not equivalent. 93% of companies that lost use of their data for 10 days or more filed for bankruptcy shortly thereafter. That's huge. Of the companies experiencing disasters, 43% never reopened, 29% closed within 2 years. Average cost of downtime is a function of labor, a little over $1 million per hour for large organizations. Post-Katrina, over 100 healthcare agencies serving over 21,000 patients, flooded or permanently destroyed. Big, big things to recover from. So we look at some of these things, we may not think they're all that probable, but if they do occur, the impact can be massive. And it's measured in business terms. So big guys tend to fall harder, and if you've been watching the news, you may have seen some of these events recently. United and Virgin Atlantic Airlines lost access to their system. They had passengers stranded all over the globe. 11 days of impact. It's incredible. BlackBerry, 3 days offline over wide swaths of the globe. Their share price tanked immediately. Customers left in droves. Big business impact to a technology problem. DBS Bank in Singapore, systems went down. For several days, customers did not have access to their accounts, had no knowledge if their money was still there or not. Huge PR nightmare. And DBS Bank, they do a massive amount of work in that hemisphere, and their reputation was just shot. Lockheed Martin recently hacked government secrets. Maybe they got out, maybe they didn't. Big risk to some of their high-value contracts because of that. The defense industry does not want to work with companies that can't keep their technology secret. We don't want the enemies knowing what we can throw at them. So what is your cost of downtime? What's the cost to you if your systems go away? This isn't always simple to calculate, but it's important that you make an attempt to do so because it helps you justify the budgets for things that you want to do in business continuity and in disaster recovery. So think about impact to productivity. Your processes can stop today because we rely so heavily on technology. When systems go down, tools aren't available, there's always a knee-jerk response. And that knee-jerk response often draws in a massive amount of unbudgeted expense. Temporary personnel, temporary facilities, temporary equipment, all sorts of band-aids that cost a lot of money. Revenue can take a hit. You're not moving product out to customers, you're not getting cash back from customers. Your reputation, if you're a company that enjoys any publicity whatsoever and your systems go down and you can't serve your customers, your business partners, your supply chain, it's going to hurt reputation-wise. And financial performance is going to take a hit. These are things that have an impact, the performance thing, not only on the company, but as on individuals. We all have performance metrics to live up to. So make an attempt at least to understand the cost of downtime to your organization, your business unit, and be able to use that as a pillar of developing a strategy. You need to justify why you want to spend money on protecting yourself from going down in the first place. So why are we talking about disaster recovery again? Why should we care? We rely so heavily today on systems. That reliance is only going to increase. Data is just massive. It's everywhere. And the interconnectedness, again, I want to focus you in on that. Your systems go down, it may not only impact you and your organization, it may impact organizations up and down the stream. Okay, so we throw around these acronyms and these terms: business continuity planning, disaster recovery. What Lynn and I have been doing with GE Healthcare, we've been calling IT service continuity management. They're all different. They're not equivalent. And please try to drive that home. These aren't equivalent. They're not owned in one single place. They're not the same deliverable. Business continuity, you really need to be looking at the things you do every day and define the minimum critical requirements for supporting those things you do every day, for keeping them alive. You need to have plans in place to mitigate potential losses when disasters do occur, and they're not always technology disasters. Disaster recovery is focused on the technology aspect of things. It's IT focused, but it relies on input from the business all the time. Concentrates on deploying technology, having plans ready, testing plans, doing drills, educating stakeholders, and understanding how technology will be used, employed, restored, and support processes in downtime. IT service continuity management, we're kind of calling this the technical subcomponent of business continuity planning. We're taking IT-related business threats, addressing them through a few pillars. We're saying you will never have a perfect disaster recovery solution in your technology environment. You will never have a perfect solution. Things are always changing. If you could have a perfect solution, you wouldn't want to pay for it because that money would be better spent in other areas. You'd be better off increasing market share, doing more research and development, increasing your products, things like that, services. So you can't have a perfect DR solution. You shouldn't be all that excited about paying for it if you could have it. So what we're looking at here in IT service continuity management is kind of pillars. We should be continuously reducing risk where we can, improving our ability to respond to technical things, improving recoverability, avoidance actions, avoid the disasters in the first place, and look for areas to reduce the cost of doing all this. So it's continuous, it's iterative, it's ongoing development of maturity. It's not some perfect end state where we say, hey, we bought this neat little widget, we put it in the data center, and now business is protected so you can all sleep well at night. You'll never be there. So having a program, continuous, iterative, lots of people involved, always selling the why, which is going back to the cost of downtime. So business continuity management, not just another name for disaster recovery. It includes disaster recovery, which is the focus on the IT systems, what's going on in the server closet, the ability to restore hardware and software. But it's also looking at system reliability and availability. It's removing risk. It's avoiding downtime, especially the things that we humans cause ourselves, building in redundancy, looking for interoperability, things like that. We're looking at business recovery and resumption, more on the procedural side. So what are our escalation processes? Who are the people we're screaming out to when something happens? How do we enact a plan to recover an entire site versus just a partial site recovery plan? Do we have contingency plans in place? Do we have a crisis management plan in place? You need to have some more of these business-focused things in place and not rely simply on a technology solution, a magic button somewhere in that room over there. We'll get into all of this a little bit deeper. There's been this evolution in thinking here. The 80s, the 90s, 2000s, we're kind of into the 2010s now. The business focus has changed, as have the requirements, the things driving them, what magnifies these things. In the technology space, the recovery has changed a lot. You know, in the 80s, it was a lot of mainframe stuff, recover the hardware. The data's in the same room, everyone's back online. In the 90s, things began to get a little bit more distributed. Client server was a little bit bigger. Today, we have a few different models for deploying applications to people's desktops, but we also do this uncanny thing where we build disaster recovery plans into everything that's in the data center, and then we store some of our most sensitive and sometimes critical business data in a spreadsheet on Joe's desktop. And so bits and pieces of this are everywhere. We have to think about this different. And expectations have changed. In the 80s, things were perhaps a little less transactional than they are today. There was less interconnectedness. We didn't rely on data the way we did today. So a recovery that took many days, or for more sensitive businesses, financial industry perhaps, many hours, that was okay. Today, the expectation has changed wildly. Things are so transactional and so data heavy, everything grinds to a halt unless we can bring our systems back quickly. There are external pressures in the compliance space too that have really changed the way that we look at this. So beyond all of the business reasons for doing this, there are compliance imperatives that haven't existed in the past. So it's gone from optional to mandatory. Actually, the way you're looking at it, optional is over here, mandatory is over here. So why are we talking about disaster recovery in addition to business continuity? Trends. There are always new trends emerging. So consistency is one thing. At GE Healthcare, we see this a lot because we do a lot of mergers and acquisitions. We draw new technology into our environment sometimes by buying companies that have developed new things. The moment that purchase is made, there's this breakdown in consistency between what we're doing from a business continuity perspective and what the new acquisition is doing. What we're doing in the data center versus what they were doing. They bring with them these risks that we hadn't thought about before. And the things that they've planned for and trained to execute on aren't the same as us. So there's this consistency. You need to think about this in your organization as well. What are you doing internally versus what you're doing with partners? Down the road, across country, the other side of the world? Are your suppliers, your partners tied into the things you're doing? Shifting environments and responsibility, new media, new threats, as Richard was alluding to. These things change every day. So the risk picture, that probability thing that we talked about, it changes every day. Should be continuously reevaluated. Integration. I had just said briefly that when technology goes down, a lot of your business and its reputation is balanced on the technology. So there's this integration between incident management and corporate communications. You can't act today just to bring your business back online. You also need the PR people doing some mitigation. Catastrophic event scenarios, they're getting worse, I would argue. Not that they're more frequent or they're more catastrophic on a human scale, but because we're leveraging ourselves against technology more so than we ever have before, when these big events occur, the impact is felt much more. And this rash of new uprisings and political change, that's going to have an impact that's going to reverberate for a while. Cyberspace attacks. And then another trend that's emerging, something we've been focusing on quite a bit, is testing complexity. So it used to be that we'd put together this plan to do some sort of disaster recovery for a specific piece of technology, and we'd tell the technology guys, okay, go test that thing that you just built. They'd come back and say, hey, we played with it, it worked. The system comes back online. We can do it in 9 hours, something like that. We have to get more complex in the way we test because of that interconnectedness that I mentioned. Within the business and with partners. Multi-day testing scenarios. Have testing paradigms that allow you to pause at the end of the day. Let people go home and relax, come back with a fresh mind, resume the test and resume the timing. But understand that you need to be doing more complex testing than ever before, and it's going to stretch out for a bit. Involve multiple scenarios. So on Wednesday, we're going to have a disaster recovery test, and that's all you say, and the people will start to prepare themselves for that thing. And then Wednesday morning, you tell 2 of the key people, you're not participating in the test today because, oh, something happened. The tragedy affected your family and you're staying home to protect your family. That's the scenario we're testing against. Throw some monkey wrenches in your testing. See if it's as mature, your programs, your policies, your procedures, if they're as mature as you think they are. Is your documentation where you think it is? Continuity and communications plans. Don't just test the technical piece of your recovery. Try out your communication plan. Can you get in touch with people the way you've written it down on your communication plan? They still answering at the phone numbers they listed for you? Are you leveraging any of the new social media to get hold of people? Issues, challenges, and risks. One of the big things that we see, many of us are seeing this, if not all of us, senior management commitment and involvement. Is business continuity planning, disaster recovery planning, is it championed by people high enough up in the organization that it's a priority, that it's something that's focused on? Are the appropriate resources driven toward these projects, these concerns? Lack of thorough understanding of the data dynamics. I'll get back to this in a second. There's another slide on it, and I'll bring up a little example of something. But you need to understand how data behaves in your environment. Inappropriate approach to executing business continuity management processes. This can mean many things. Incorrect or inappropriate assumptions. This can mean many things. And it also ties back to data dynamics. People assume different things, and they assume those things while they're planning, while they're designing, while they're testing. And then the day the disaster occurs, you find out none of your assumptions were valid. And there's always this perception that DR, disaster recovery, and the business continuity responsibilities that come along with it, that they're an IT problem. There's a magic button, a magic switch. It's in that closet over there, and they ran that test once, and they told me it went well, and so I just rely on that magic button over there. We have to break down that perception. So senior management commitment. You have to get champions, and they have to remain involved. They have to give these things visibility. If they delegate it, it immediately loses some of its relevance, some of its importance. You're probably going to take a hit on the budgets for the efforts that you're trying to institute. Implementing business continuity management for the wrong reasons. We saw in our environment that there was a little bit too much of a focus on compliance. And compliance is certainly a reason to do business continuity management and disaster recovery, but it's certainly not the only reason. We, after all, are protecting billions of dollars in revenue. That's a pretty good reason to do some of these things. Business and IT disconnect. If the business cannot communicate its expectations to IT clearly, IT can't execute on those expectations. But often that discussion never takes place. It's an IT thing. Create a magic button in the server room. A technology-only approach toward resilience. We have all these IT systems. We expect the IT ninjas to protect them. Do your security thing. And we'll change our passwords every once in a while. And we understand there will be a few policies. But you can bring down your systems with some interesting social, tweaks too. It's not hard to lose a badge. It's not hard to lose a password. It's not hard for someone to shadow you through a door and do some pretty evil things. So it's not just an IT problem. Absence of a single framework. I'll argue today that disaster recovery and business continuity are two different things, but they're heavily intertwined, and they have to come together at some place. The business leadership has to have some understanding of the technology component. The technology folks have to understand the expectations of the business. Both parties need to understand what the other is doing so that the response meets somewhere in the middle. I've already told you it isn't perfect. It won't be perfect. If it was perfect, you paid too much for it. But you want to come towards some center together. And lack of consensus between senior management and operations management as to what the expectations should be. And we draw out recovery point objective, recovery time objective. So how much data are we willing to lose? How fast should we be able to recover? Operations is likely to have one idea about this, and senior management's going to have another idea. Operations wants it to happen now, and we don't want to lose any data. And senior leadership's going to say, we're not paying for that. You need to be able to absorb some amount of downtime, some data loss. Design your processes around those assumptions. So there's a middle. It has to be found. So lack of thorough understanding of data dynamics. I won't read off the slide. I'll give you a little bit of an example here. In one of my prior roles, I worked at a large integrated healthcare delivery organization. Lots of hospitals, physician offices. We had an affiliated laboratory environment. And we lost some major software at the laboratory. We had a bit of a disaster. And as things were coming back online, the recovery was largely driven by the IT folks. And we ended up with this mismatch of what was happening as far as how processes and data tied together. So we need to be able to receive specimens from patients, perform testing on those specimens, deliver results back to the physicians that ordered those tests. But when it comes down to data, The very first thing we need was admissions data from the hospital. So we knew what patients we were dealing with and where they were, what physicians were seeing them. So we had to know some things about our patients, called that ADT data. Then we need to get orders so we know what tests are expected on these specimens that continue to fly into the lab. Lastly, we should be bringing up the systems, the tools that allow us to deliver the results back to the physicians. But things weren't necessarily coming up in that order because the IT folks didn't understand how the business used data. So we're receiving order transactions before we had the data to tell us who the patients were. Things are all mismatched, and we reached a point where we got so bogged down, we were so slowed down in delivering results, test results, they were going to stop the organ transplant program. Literally patients on tables waiting to receive a new liver. We can't do it because we can't get the pathology results to the surgeons in the room. That's huge impact. If you've been waiting the better part of a year to get a new liver and you're on the table and, oh, an IT system went down somewhere and we can't give you your new liver today, holy cow. That's sad. So you really need to understand how data is used in your environment so you can plan. The business can say, this is how we consume data, and these are our expectations for recovery. It's got to be understood. So inappropriate approach in executing processes. Oftentimes there's a big location-based focus rather than a process focus. How would we recover, the Brookfiled site if it went down? Ignoring that there's some process and that Brookfiled is just a relevant cog in that process somehow. If you do a lot of location-based planning and design, you'll find that you'll fail your processes. So you need to look at things both ways. Business impact assessment. Looking at applications in silos, looking at processes in silos, rather than looking at the interconnectedness that we mentioned earlier. And giving an equal weight when you're looking at risks to all of those risk attributes. So we said to know your cost of downtime. We said think about some of the threats that might affect your environment. When you look at those things, don't weigh all of these things the same. When you look at any given risk, you should look at its severity. How bad would it be if it did happen? You should look at its likelihood. How likely is it to happen? Look at the non-detectability or the detectability. You might say, will we get any forewarning? Will we know it's coming? And decide upon a way to weight these things for what's relevant to your business. That might help you target the things that you're addressing for the removal of risk or the design of recoverability or the removal of cost. Because I'm going to say once again, this is one of the take-home messages, by the way, you'll never have a perfect disaster recovery solution. If you could have it, hopefully you didn't pay for it because it's going to be too expensive. Focus on the things that are riskiest to your environment with the right process focus, the right data focus. So, inappropriate assumptions. Disasters do not occur in isolation. So if you think about your DR planning in silos, you think about designing for one application at a time or one process at a time or one type of data at a time, you'll find that disasters don't occur that way. They can wipe out a lot of things all at once. So you need to think about broad scenarios. You're not likely to be the only person affected by the disaster. Maybe you are, but maybe you aren't. So when Mubarak turned off the internet in Egypt, GE was not the only company impacted. Our entire supply chain and service network over there was affected by that. Competition for scarce resources in disasters. This is an interesting thing. I can tell you today, GE Healthcare, there are areas where we do excellent planning and preparation. We have great tests, and there are other areas where it's not so great. But all of our tests are built off of this assumption where we're testing one or a few systems at a time. If we had a major disaster that impacted a wide swath of things, we don't have enough people to execute all of those DR plans, all of those business continuity plans at the same time. We'd be calling upon a lot of temporary help, looking for all sorts of consultants and ninjas from nearby organizations. But if the disaster has been broad enough and it's affecting the community enough, everyone else is calling upon those resources as well. So you need to think about your assumptions when you're designing your recovery and your testing. So business continuity methodology. Awareness, operation planning, site evaluation, risk assessment, business impact analysis. Those things will lead toward a strategy development. The strategy, the goals that are defined in that strategy help you design your recovery plan. Then you have to validate and test. You have to implement the plan and do maintenance, do training, things like that. So we'll dive into these a bit. But this is a bit of a process. So first there's an awareness. You form some teams, you get some organization and planning going on, site evaluation, risk assessment, doing business impact analysis, strategy development, defining the goals, then designing the recovery plan. And then there's this validation and testing procedure. We built recoverability into our environment. We built some redundancy into our environment. Let's test that thing now. Then you move on to approving the plan. We defined our goals, we defined a plan, we tested what we built, we kind of approve what's going on here, we communicate it out to the business, we implement it, and then you need to have a maintenance program in place. This is a lot of work, and sadly, the things that are in the dotted box there are the things that happen in most organizations, I would say. Hey you, IT guys, build us a recoverability plan. Give us some tools so we can bring things back online. If you're lucky, it's tested well and people get trained on how to do it. But some of the people who designed and built it leave, new blood comes into the organization, they're not necessarily indoctrinated in what's been done, where the plans are kept, where the magic button is. So I'll argue with you today that this entire thing needs to be continuous and ongoing and reevaluated because business is always changing. So the goals will change, the risks will change, the money that's available to invest in these things will change. So I think you have to bring your organization to a point where this entire process is part of your culture and it happens continuously, iteratively. There might be miniature cyclical paths in certain parts of this chain, but the whole thing needs to be focused on. And you'll see the box that says site evaluation. But a few slides ago I said, don't just focus on sites, focus on processes, focus on data. So remember that. Site evaluation is not just site evaluation. It's kind of business evaluation. You have to drive awareness. In a lot of organizations, somebody somewhere thought that business continuity planning, disaster recovery is a good idea. They kick off a project. A couple of people maybe gets assigned some specific goals, and then it gets forgotten about. Make sure that awareness stays high. A lot of progress reports, validation, testing, all that stuff. And push it up in the organization as high as you can. The more senior the people are who champion these things, the more life they'll take on. The better the investment you'll get in them. The more likely it is that a lot of people have these things tied to their goals, and it'll move through the organization better. Try not to leave these things driven by IT. That happens a lot. Because we rely so heavily on technology, these things tend to get assigned to folks in the technology realm, and they assume that IT will drive it. But then a lot of the things that you're doing might be focused on the latest technology that's available, or it might be focused on that one piece of technology that someone in the data center understands really well. Well, it might not be the best tool for the job. And in any case, the thing that's getting designed might not be designed to the expectations of the business. So these things will generally go much, much better, have better maturity and effectiveness if they're driven by the business. The business's evaluation of itself and the goal setting they do from that evaluation. Wet my whistle here. So organization and planning, it should be similar to other large projects. Management approval for funding. For personnel, you have to get those commitments. Develop plans like you would for other projects in your organization. Use your same project methodologies. Have the same champions, the same charters. Document the goals. Don't just think like, well, they're going to build some secret thing in the lab back there. It's going to be really cool when they're done with it. Make sure that these things, these business continuity projects, these disaster recovery projects, they should get the same visibility and structure lent to them that your other initiatives would. Make sure the scope is defined. That's huge. I think a lot of times, especially if IT drives the project, and it's one of these projects that doesn't have a lot of visibility, the business just begins to assume that the whole data center will be recovered, and it'll all be recovered with the same magic button. And it'll all come online basically at the same time, which ignores a lot of these other assumptions that we've been talking about. The thing to focus on here is, I want to get back to this continuous, iterative, cyclical portion of this discussion. So I'll come down to test your business continuity and test your recovery plans. You should always have test scenarios to validate the technology solution that you've defined, but also all of the other response processes. Testing your communications plan. Testing some of the reciprocal agreements you might have with your partners up and down the road. Document, publicize within the organization, how did the test go? And immediately schedule the next test. It's so easy to forget about these things. Other things will take priority. That new compliance requirement, it'll overwhelm these types of things. Oh, that new shiny product that we're developing. We got to get it ready. It's got to be out before the holiday season. It's going to overshadow business continuity and disaster recovery. Some new challenge emerges, or certain financial goals aren't met, and all of a sudden the focus just changes really quickly. So have processes in your organization to keep a bit of a focus on this. Because even when you think you've got it down, you don't, because the business realm is always changing. The risks are always changing. So site evaluations. Identify and document your business locations and how they support your processes. You might categorize them, but you might not, depending on how your processes are distributed. But you might have manufacturing or industrial, sales and retail, customer service, call centers. You might have highly distributed support network, data centers, which may do nothing but be a data center. What vital records are stored there? Have an inventory of your business systems, including manual processes. You'd be amazed at the importance of things that can someday just get caught up in a spreadsheet. GE Healthcare, when I first arrived there, one of the things that surprised me was how much management by PowerPoint goes on. An incredible amount. And it scares me sometimes to think of the incredibly important information that's stored in a PowerPoint presentation on somebody's laptop somewhere. We don't have a plan to recover that if it falls in the lake. So, interesting things to think about sometimes. Think about the IT systems that support the business systems, and try, if you can, to think of those as separate things sometimes. So risk assessment, like everything else I've been preaching so far, this has to be done continuously, iteratively, because the risks change, both in their likelihood and their impact. So you should be looking at this all the time. What are your vulnerabilities? Hardware, data, systems and processes, buildings, people, partnerships, suppliers, others. If you have reciprocal agreements with other organizations as part of your business continuity plans, think about how those relationships change over time. Because we're always forming new partnerships, new competition, and that may affect some of these dynamics. Have there been past interruptions? Most of us have experienced some kind of interruption. How did you respond when that happened? Did you do a good job? Did you do not so good job? Did it highlight for you how some of your assumptions might have been flawed? Did you go to your plans right away because you knew where they were? People were familiar with the fact that they existed? Or did Dilbert run up and down the hall and go, where's the plan? Having an interruption, even if it's on a small scale, it can tell you a lot about the maturity of your planning and your preparedness. So when you have something go wrong, don't only respond to it, also use it as a learning opportunity. It can help the maturity of your program immensely. And it can also help frame things for you. I know I'll have people stop by and pay me a visit, and they'll say, hey, last night, a certain piece of technology failed, and it brought this one system offline for 4 hours. And we got it working again. We brought the system back online. We really need to talk about the disaster recovery plan for that. I'm like, why? You didn't have a disaster. You had a 4-hour blip because you lost one piece of technology. Like, use the events that you have to really frame what's going on, because your response changes some. Actually enacting your business continuity plan or your disaster recovery plan can have enormous expense. So you want to know what the thresholds are for putting that plan into action. And using the smaller events that occur now and then as a bit of a barometer for how you might make that decision, it's good practice. So business interruptions, they can come from physical causes, electronic causes, natural, other. A lot of things can cause problems in your environment, both just within the business realm to your processes or to your technology. The sinkholes one is funny if you're in and around the Milwaukee area. We seem to have a lot of these lately, swallowing SUVs. Outside popular restaurants, so if you're in town, don't go to the good restaurants. That's where the sinkholes happen lately. And then this geopolitical thing, it's just the last 18 months or so, this has been huge, especially if you're a global company. Just been incredible. Syria, was it? Who was it that just told U.S. citizens they couldn't leave? They've begun to detain U.S. citizens. Egypt. It was Egypt. So we had begun to calm down about Egypt, and then all of a sudden they're telling a lot of people with U.S. passports, we can't let you go home. If you have a couple critical people trapped in some country on the other side of the world, that could be a big blow to your processes as well. What's your plan for that? So there's just interesting things to think about. We've seen a lot of them lately that have nothing to do with technology. Dave is stuck in Egypt. What do we do? So considerations in analyzing risk should include a lot of things. Investigating the history and frequency of particular types of disasters or risks. Determining the degree of predictability, as I mentioned. Will we see it coming? Or will it hurt before we know what happened? Analyzing the speed of onset. The tsunami was a good example. We get 90 minutes notice. They know it's out there in the ocean somewhere. It's coming. So there's a bit of predictability to it. But when it hits a shore, it hits a shore. That onset's going to be fast. And 90 minutes isn't a lot to do, any preparatory work. Yes, sir.
Since I got the microphone, think about the tsunami in Japan. My younger brother works in nuclear energy. And I asked him, how can a nuclear plant built along the shores of Japan in a seismically active area not have been designed for that? And he said, actually it was. They had planned for a 17-foot storm surge. It was 51 feet. That they didn't plan for. So, to your point.
About assumptions. 3 times the expectation, 17 to 51. That's incredible. So we did think about it. We designed for it. It's probably a hard thing to test, right? But tsunamis have been happening for some time. Every time one happens, we learn something about designing to protect against it. So there's some history to base your assumptions on, but then that thing happens and it's 3 times the size you thought it would be. It's incredible. And which brings me back to, again, your solution might not be perfect. What would the cost have been to protect against a 51-foot swell? Monumental, I assume. There's always a risk-reward calculation that goes on. It's soft science. And I shouldn't say that. In some businesses, it's soft science. In other businesses, you can nail down these costs, and you can do really good projections about what you might want to spend. But you have to think about it continuously because it always changes. Duration of disaster. That's another big one. Something like a fire might only last a couple hours, but if we had a pandemic event, the Great Flu pandemic of 2014, that could affect you for months or years. again, that wouldn't be something that affects your technology necessarily. But if your critical people are getting sick left and right, or they're staying home to take care of sick loved ones left and right, and that's draining your resources for a year, that can be really bad. So this is a risk assessment example. We took different scenarios: natural threats, flooding, internal and external fires, external fires, seismic activity, winds, snow and ice storms, tornadoes, things that we thought to one degree or another might be relevant to our geographic location. We described them to make sure we all understood what we were talking about exactly. And then we said, what's the probability of something like this happening on an annual basis? What's the impact if it does happen? What's the risk value there? These discussions can descend into these emotional arguments, and they can get very subjective. So it helps to create some kind of objective way of describing the things. And what I would urge you to do, and this goes on a bit, I think, I'll come back. So what I would urge you to do is say, we're going to use this scoring scale, and we're going to score all things on this scale. And we'll look at things like probability.